Hi, everybody. It's fantastic that you've joined us this evening. Thank you so much for coming along and on quite short notice. My name's Kim Lake. I'm a training officer in Northern Ireland for the BSBI. Now, this evening's discussion is being delivered as part of the Northern Ireland Botanical Skills Project, which is a project supporting botanists across the whole skills spectrum with training, events, and online webinars, just like this one. This particular talk is aimed at a fairly specialist subject, the identification of different Rubus or Bramble species. There's a few of us probably here tonight just guilty of just recording as Rubus ag. I know I am. So hopefully we all enjoyed tonight's discussion and get to talk a little bit if we have any questions about how to identify the different species that we have here in Northern Ireland. So I hope you all enjoy the session. We're really hoping to start seeing some new records coming in for the different Bramble species that we have. Before we begin, I just want to point out this talk is being recorded, so you would have heard the message when you came in, hopefully. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland, who funded this project through the carrier bag levy. Without them, this webinar and indeed the whole Botanical Skills Project just wouldn't have been possible. So a massive thank you to them. Just also while I have you, to let you know that most, if not all of our past webinars are recorded and available to you on YouTube. So in case you've missed them or you weren't aware they were there, over the next few days, I'll send out a link to the recordings. Just some general housekeeping before I introduce our speakers. There will be time for questions throughout the talk. In fact, it'd be great if it was a bit of a discussion. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen somewhere in the middle-ish here, where you can add your questions as you think of them. My fellow training officer, Jo Mulholland, is on the call this evening, and she will help to make sure we get through as many of your questions as time allows. When you ask the question, your screen name will be visible, so please do make sure it's set to something that you're happy for other people to see and for it to appear on the recording. You will also have the option to post questions anonymously if you prefer not to show your name. Now, this discussion is being recorded, and you'll notice that because we're in a webinar format, everybody is muted at the start. So if you would like to ask a question out loud, please click the raise hand button and I can unmute you at the next opportunity. But do be aware that your voice and possibly video would be captured in that recording. And again, your screen name. So just be aware of it. Just also to give you fair warning, you will have to bear with us a little bit as we wrangle the Zoom webinar controls for the first time. So please do forgive me if I'm a little bit slow to spot your raised hand or unmute you. We'll get to it. I think that's all the admin I need to cover. So we'll get on with the fun part. As we're in the midst of bramble season, we wanted to build up our knowledge of the species found here in Northern Ireland with the aim to promote more detailed recording in the future. So hopefully this conversation today will be the first of several events that we'll organise over the coming year that focus on Rubus identification. Now, just to let you know, David Earle, who's the BSBI referee for Rubus in Northern England, North Wales and Ireland, is also on the call this evening. And David recently gave an online talk on Rubus in Northern Ireland, and that is also available on our YouTube channel. So hopefully later on, David can also help us answer any questions about particular species that are found here in Northern Ireland, but not in Scotland. But first, I'm delighted just to introduce tonight's speaker, Angus Hannah. Angus is the author of the new BSBI Handbook, Brambles of Scotland, VCR for the Clyde Islands, that's VC 100. And we're absolutely thrilled to have him here this evening just to give us a short talk and help with all of your questions that you would have about bramble identification, about the species that are common between Scotland and Northern Ireland, and if his new handbook can be of use to us when we're identifying the bramble species here in Northern Ireland. So, Angus, thank you very much for coming to speak to us. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Kim. That is very kind of you, and welcome to everyone who is here. And I can't see you, I don't know who you are, but I'm sure you're all out there somewhere. And I feel in some ways a bit of a fraud because I've never even set foot in Ireland, and it's, you know, it's a strange country to me, and I've done my best the last few days to try and learn a little bit about it and about, in particular, what you have in the way of brambles. I've been looking at the DDB and found out that you have most excellent records for the aggregate Fruticosus aggregate bramble from every hectare on Northern Ireland has records for that, which is quite remarkable, really, because in Scotland we have about 80 hectares that have no brambles whatsoever. So you have no gaps, really. And I think you have about 12,500 records for Fruticosus. So there's plenty of scope for finding out which species they actually are. As you have, in fact, I think fewer than 1,000 actual species records. So there's a lot of room for progress. And the question is, how do we set about helping you to achieve it? Well, I don't know. But you've said that you find my book is potentially useful because there is a big overlap between Brambles of Scotland and those of Northern Ireland, particularly Northern Ireland. And this is an interesting fact, which will eventually perhaps be possible to understand historically to a certain extent. But at the moment, we don't really have enough information about the distribution in Ireland to make a very good guess about that. So I'll pass over that question for just now. But yes, there are plenty of species there that are in common with Scotland. In fact, there are, I think, only about half a dozen that are recorded, perhaps more than once in Northern Ireland, that are not recorded also in Scotland. Most frequent of these is one called Calvatus, which I have never encountered. Perhaps David knows a little about that and might want to say a few words on it, either now or at some point. But that certainly is one that might prove to be quite common in Ireland. And if it does, then that will be a significant difference from Scotland, where as far as we know, it doesn't exist at all. The other ones are mostly, I think, Irish endemics. There is Lettii and Hibernicus and Junensis, which is almost an endemic. I think we have it in Wigtonshire, just across the North Channel, but I think that's spread from Ireland to Scotland rather than the other way around. Most of the species, I should say, I think have spread from Scotland into Ireland rather than going the other way, because they don't exist further south in Ireland. And if they'd come up through Ireland, they would surely have remained in the south as well. So they appear to be Scottish species that have spread round and somehow crossed to the north. Now, there are only two species in Northern Ireland that have been recorded in any significant numbers, and these are Ulmifolius and Latifolius. And I think this is because two of your recorders have respectively confidence in their ability to record these two, and they've made a good job of it in their localities. And this leaves us asking all sorts of questions as to whether they would perhaps be equally frequent in some other localities where they just haven't been recorded, or whether they happen to have, just been common in the particular bits where the recorders have been. We don't know. I think particularly Latifolius might be a bit more widespread around the coasts, but you can't really speculate because we don't know. We'll find out. Now, there was something else I wanted to say about the book at this stage, and that is that I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but it was produced in Publisher, Microsoft Publisher, and Microsoft Publisher is being abolished effectively in a year's time, which means that no further editions could be produced. The book couldn't be, updated or in any way edited after that point. As far as we can tell, this is going to happen in October of next year. And before that, it would be possible for me to create an e-book of Northern Irish brambles, if that would be helpful. So I imagine it might be. So we have the Scottish book in an e-book form, but it would exist as a PDF, and I could relatively easily modify the pages to fit the Irish brambles and the maps. I could put in maps of Irish distribution and so on. if that would be something that people would like, somebody might wish to say whether or not they do, but if we'll think about it a bit and see what they think.
Just to let
But
you know, I'm just granting everybody the ability to talk if you do want to say something, or just put your hand up and join the conversation, and that would be great. And please do let us know if you have any questions or anything you'd like to talk about here. Thank you.
Yes, I would appreciate any input from any of you, because I am to some degree talking in the dark because of my ignorance of Ireland in general, and the stage of things in Ireland.
I suppose it would also be helpful if Angus or David, is there particular characteristics of the brambles that we should be looking at, especially at this time of year, that would help us work out which of the species we're looking at, or if we wanted to contact you, what should we be photographing to get your help?
Yes, I can certainly say something about these things. If you're sending photographs, there are a few basic pieces of advice for any bramble photograph. Really, it's a very good idea to avoid taking them in bright sunlight or in rain, because raindrops distort things and hairs disappear and so on. And also, you don't want to take plants that have been in heavy shade, because they will be uncharacteristic. You want to try and choose the most typical kind of plant and the most suitable bit of it. And as to the bits that you need to choose, well, it's fairly obvious that we should have some stem, some leaf, and some flower if possible. But to be more specific, you want primocane stem if it's available, approximately a metre or so from the end if it's a long stem, so that it's a point at which it's had a chance to get reasonably well developed, but not old so that it's got worn down. You want something sensible. And obviously you want it in good focus and close enough that you could see small details on it. Well, that's self-evident, really. You have a nice specimen behind you in the photograph there, Kim, which is very well taken, because the background is totally out of focus and the leaf is beautifully sharp on the stem. And that's a tricky thing to do, because the camera is always very much inclined to focus upon the background rather than upon what you want at the front. So, yes, fortunately with modern equipment, you can check the photograph as soon as you've taken it, and if it looks fuzzy, to try again. But yes, that's what you need for the stem and the stem leaf. And then you might, if you have the opportunity to take a leaf from the primocane, it's a good thing to turn it upside down as well and show the underside, or at least a part of it. One leaflet we do. And you should always remember that the tip of the leaflet is particularly important, and it is inclined to turn underneath and disappear if you take a photo from above. If the leaf's a bit convex, the tip tends to be lost, and that's unfortunate, because it's rather a critical thing. And also, it's useful to see whether the leaflets are pedate or digitate. Anybody needs that explained, I can do, but assuming you know it, that's okay.
It would be great if you wouldn't mind explaining it, just for anybody who maybe is watching a recording later on that isn't as
okay. I can easily do that. Digitate, the leaflets all appear to come from the same point at the axil, as it were, at the top of the petiole, whereas on a pedate leaf, the two basal leaflets each are mounted on the stalk of the lateral leaflets. And this happens, I think, because they develop somewhat later when the lateral's already developed, and by that time they're coming from a bit further along. But whatever the reason, it's a useful character, because although it's not at all infallible, but there's a tendency in any given species to be one or the other of these things, or sometimes just somewhere in the middle. If it can be shown in a photograph, it's useful. And then you go on to the photographing the flowers, if they're there. And you want several pictures at different distances, really, and different angles. you want to be able to see how tall the stamens rise. So you want one from the side. You want to get close enough in to see if there's any anther hairs, if there are any, to see them, which is quite tricky to see in a photograph, unless you can get a dark background, and you can't always do that. But if you get near enough, they can usually be seen. And the other important thing really is carpal hairs, which you can also photograph if you can get close enough in by removing some stamens from one side of the flower, and then you can reveal the carpals, and if you can show that, it's extremely helpful. Of course, when it moves on to fruit, you can see the carpals, but by that time, very often the hairs have come off or fallen off or otherwise disappeared, so it's always better to get them sooner. And the other thing, of course, is the sepals, which are very well displayed in bud. If you have a chance to photograph a bud with the sepals closed against it so that you see the undersides and what becomes the underside, it's the open. And that reveals quite a lot of interesting features about the flower. And then if the flowers are open, or if indeed they're moving on to fruits, it's very helpful to take another picture that shows the position of the sepals. If they are sticking straight out, we call patent, or spreading a bit, or if they are reflexing a little or strongly. And these things are good characters, but they do change as the fruit develops. So sometimes the same species will at some point have them patent and at another point reflex and so on. And sometimes they'll rise up at the end and clasp the fruit. So all these things are useful. And often a single photograph can show quite a few of them. So, you don't need as many photographs as I've mentioned characters. Usually about half a dozen is generous. But it's never too many, it doesn't matter. And depending how you're sending them, it's quite a good idea not to make them too small. I don't really like them less than a megabyte. You want to be able to zoom in to take advantage of what the camera's actually captured. So that's probably all I need to say about photography. If there's any questions on that.
Yes, and did anybody take advantage of Angus's kind offer to send some photos across so that we could have a look at them this evening? Or do you have any pictures that you would like a bit of help working out this evening to the listeners out there? If there's anybody who has pictures of Rubus you'd like to hand identifying, please let us know. Has anybody any questions either so far on anything we've mentioned?
I have plenty of photos to share if Angus is willing to have a look. Alexis Farrell's here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Alexis, are you okay if I just change you over so that we can get you sharing some pictures on screen? Would that be okay?
Oh, I don't have. Oh, sorry. I thought you meant now.
Yes.
I don't have them now, but I could do that when I'm almost home, driving at the moment.
Grand. Well,
I can do that in a minute.
Absolutely, that's no problem. That would be fantastic. Thank you, Alexis. Does anybody else have any pictures that they would like us to look at, or any questions for Angus or David on just general identification, as opposed to just taking photographs of them? See, there's a question there from Graham. Angus, could you please say something about the descriptions of primocane prickles and glands?
Yes, I should say something about that, undoubtedly. Well,
it would be fantastic, firstly, for those who aren't familiar, what that means as well, if that's okay.
Primocanes are what come up later in the season and become the following year's basis for the flowering branches and flowers. So that you won't find them as primocanes early in the season. So we look for them later on, and it was found that by quite early botologists that the most reliable characters came on these primocanes rather than on the flowering leaves. So they made a particular point in their collecting to try and ensure that they had a specimen from the primocane with a stem and a leaf to show the armature of the stem and also the character of the leaf. Now, the stem armature comes in about 4 different categories, which it's important to sort these out, really. Now, there is the main prickle, which is the longest and obviously principal set of prickles. And these can occur usually on the angles of the stem, but occasionally in some species they will be found also on the flat parts, so the furrows in between the edges. And then there are pricklets, which are essentially similar in character to the big prickles, but they are only about, well, half the size or less, noticeably significantly smaller, and sometimes a lot smaller. They can occur again mostly on the faces, but occasionally might occur in the angles, but that doesn't really matter. And then there is what we call acicles or acicles, which are like little pins, really, or needles that just stick up with no base at all. They just arise out of the stem, and they can be any length, really. I mean, you can get prickles that are described as acicular because they have that form, or they can be tiny prickles. We have a question here. Shall I answer this? In what way does strimming or cutting affect the bramble? And the simple answer is that it tends to make the armature stronger. The bramble reacts thinking this is trouble. Well, let's get the defense out, basically. And it sticks out its such as it has, it's whatever it has, glands or prickles of any kind, really tend to become stronger and closer together on the remaining bit of stem if it's been chopped off. So that again is something to avoid when you're taking a photograph. Don't take a bit of stem that has had its end chopped off, because it will be atypical. And that's not what you want. We always call them prickles. I don't know if you have considered this fact, but they are distinct from both spines and thorns. Spines are modified leaves and thorns are modified twigs or branches. But the prickles are just excrescences of the actual epidermis itself, and that's why we call them prickles, although popularly they're often called thorns or even spines. And sometimes I feel it seems a bit sad that we can only call them prickles, because they seem rather stronger than prickle. Not supposed to call them anything else. Was there anything else? Glands. I didn't say anything much about glands. Glands are very important for diagnosis because, well, basically some species have them in quantities, some have a few of them and some don't have any at all. And all these things are important, and also where they have them. Some have them on the primocane, but a lot more have them up in the inflorescence and around the flowers and the sepals and such like. And you've got to distinguish between these things, but they all help to tell you which species you're looking at. So again, if you're photographing, make sure the glands are visible if they're there. They've come onto the picture. And that will greatly help in trying to identify the plant. Now, the other thing should be mentioned perhaps is the petals, because it's a sort of self-evident thing that the colour of the petals might be a good guide, and in a way it is, but it's something you have to be especially careful with, because brambles that are described as pink very often actually have white flowers, or as often as not, some cases more often than not, but you will find a hint of pink in the buds very often, or just here and there, and that's quite significant. Because genuinely white ones will always be white, and you really don't get pink in those kind that are called white.
It's really interesting. Thank you. Sorry to just interrupt you there, Angus. I really didn't mean to cross you. We just have a couple of questions. One about how helpful the glands are in ID and where they are they dependent on the degree of sunlight that they are receiving, and how large are the glands? Do you need a strong hand lens to see them? Just before we get on about the petals, if that's okay.
The size of the gland, it's not, I suppose it varies quite a bit, but you can probably usually see them with a good eye, but to see them properly, you would certainly want a 10 times lens anyway, because they're fairly small, but they're not tiny. They're easier to see on the whole than, for instance, the anther hairs or the carpal hairs, which are often better seen with a 20 lens. Glands are also coloured, they're usually red or very often red, and that, in mass, you can see them from a distance because the whole sepal would be quite red. Whereas if you see a green sepal, you'd probably guess it didn't have any glands on it. So as long as it's been in the sun at all, it would have coloured up. But if they'd stayed in the shade, they might just have stayed green. So it's always better to inspect it properly.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Just before we continue on, John, I know you've had your hand up for a little while there. Would you like to turn your mic on and ask your question?
Sorry.
Sorry, John. John has his hand raised just to ask a question.
Oh yeah.
John, do you want to pop your mic on? And
can you hear me?
Yes, we can. That's great.
Okay. My question is just this. What tools, Angus, would you recommend for field sampling, particularly the sort of tools that you could use that aren't particularly heavy and you can just pop them in your rucksack or your bag or whatever, in case you want to sample a bramble? I wasn't thinking of sort of, long handle loppers or anything, if it can be avoided.
Well, you can get very small secateurs, which don't weigh much, maybe half a pound at the most, I don't know. But I mean, just,
right.
I sometimes or quite often carry a pair of secateurs for this purpose, but to be perfectly honest, I'm not the best and greatest fan of collecting specimens. I do try to, as much as possible, not do that because I haven't got much facilities for handling them anyway if I get them back. And if I do, I usually photograph them fairly quickly, or even sometimes photograph them in the field and then, don't even bring them back.
I was thinking of if I come across a bramble, which I want to take back in order to look at it, because I always find that if somebody says, oh, you can see it with a lens, I have to use my detecting microscope to see it. I don't know why that is. Maybe some people are too optimistic. But so I would like to be able to sample things, bring them home.
Yeah.
But one of the things that frightens me, maybe because I have some very vigorous brambles very locally, is how to get it sufficiently far down into the bramble patch to establish that something is a primocane, and get a section of it.
Yes, this is difficult, of course, but I wouldn't be too obsessed about the primocane question, really. If you can get something that's, even half a meter from the end, which surely you could manage without having to go in too far. And you only need a short section, with just maybe 2 leaves would be enough. So about maybe at the most 6 inches of the primocane.
It was more the question of establishing that it was a primocane and not a branch off last year's primocane.
Yes, this can be difficult at certain times of year. It does depend very much on the season. As you get to this time of year, primocanes are usually pretty obvious because they'll be coming up longer than most species, than the older branches that have flowered. And anyway, by now they will have flowered, so you wouldn't imagine there were primocanes. It's really earlier in the year the problem would arise. But at that point, the primocane probably isn't adequately developed anyway. And you might almost as well use a branch, but don't use an old stem, because an old stem from the previous year is useless. But
That's an important point. You said and don't use an old stem as a substitute. When you talk about a branch, is that like the central stem of an inflorescence, or is it the stem off which that central stem of that inflorescence comes?
well, no, because the stem off which that comes would be an old stem from the previous year. That would be a prima cane of the year before. So, yes, I'm thinking about the lower end of Arachis, really. I mean, you have to remember that it is Arachis, but you will find a good description of the Arachis in Edith and Newton's book. You know, it's described in detail. And you're almost as well off in some ways, as long as you know it is Arachis, to have a low Arachis if you can't get a prima cane easily.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank
And
you.
at certain times of the year, you can't get a prima cane at all. And as long as the Arachis is well enough developed that flowers are starting to appear at the top, then the bottom end of it, if it's of any reasonable length, would serve quite adequately, I think, to help with identification. But just beware that the leaves on it might be a little bit different from the prima cane ones, but you can probably observe that in the field if there are any to observe. And usually by the bottom, they really are pretty similar by the bottom of the branch.
Thank you.
Another question, Angus, on primocanes is from Greg, and it just says, you suggest primocane stems from dense shade should be avoided because they have atypical characteristics. So where does that leave woodland species which typically grow in shade? Would their open grown stems be atypical?
Yes, you have some species that prefer shade. I suppose this is true, but they will mostly actually grow slightly. I don't know that they really prefer shade. They tolerate it. But they maybe like the fact that there's less competition there. But they will actually grow better if they get a bit of sun. And usually you find one that's partially shaded and not entirely, and has managed to get to the edge of the wood, as it were, or to a little clearing, and it will be growing well and should be a good typical example. So it could be a little harder sometimes, and sometimes, in the wood, they don't even flower anyway, so they're not going to offer you much in the way of guidance as to what they are.
Thank you. We just have a question from Andrew as well, and Andrew, I feel you on this one. It's just as a layman on the subject, I presume that bramble was just one species. So how many species of bramble are there, whether that be in Northern Ireland or across the UK and Ireland? And in layman's terms, how can we process this sort of information to a course student on a bushcraft weekend talking about foraging? That's an interesting part. But initially, how many species roughly are there in the UK and Ireland?
In where?
In the UK and Ireland.
In Ireland, in Northern Ireland. There's been recorded something in the region of 50, I think.
Wow.
But not most, but about half of them are very rare as far as we know, because only recorded once or twice, but they might prove to be much commoner than that, of course. But I don't think you're going to find many more than 50, which is not too bad.
Right, thank you. Are there any particular varieties that are commonly misidentified, and what should we watch out for with those? Or do people tend to just bundle everything up into Rubus ag?
You mean which ones are more difficult?
Yes.
Or more liable to
or more likely to
confused?
have been mistakenly identified as a different species?
That's a hard thing to answer, really, because it may be different for different people in different places. You can say that one or two are easier, probably. Well, the obvious easy example is Laciniatus, which everybody can identify because it's totally unlike any other bramble. But that's not very helpful, really. I think probably Latifolius, in a broad sense, can be very easily identified because its leaves are pretty distinctive. But unfortunately, it's not really a clear-cut species, and it goes off in various directions and probably contains more than one species that we haven't yet described. So there are difficulties, but you can record it as latifolius for the time being, as long as you are aware that that possibility might exist in the future.
How common are hybrids?
Well, this depends very much on where you are, because basically there's only the two species in this country that are the source of hybrids, which are Ulmifolius and Caesius. And as I have mentioned, we do have rather a lot of records for Ulmifolius in Ireland. So along the margins of that particular population and in among it, you may find that hybrids are fairly common, depending what other species you have there. I believe Vestitus in particular is prone to hybridize with Ulmifolius. And we had a potential case of that David was talking about when we were in Lothian a couple of weeks ago. But it's not with us at all a common phenomenon, but in a particular location where you have a lot of Ulmifolius, these kind of things can happen quite often, I believe. Caesius is going to be rare with you anyway, so it's not going to pose the same degree of problems. On the whole, brambles don't hybridize with each other because they're apomecs. Both of them are not going to accept any input from the male, the opposite partner, as it were. So it's not going to produce any effects in the offspring.
Any other questions for Angus, or anything we're not sure on, those identification ones, or the species we think are most that you're most often recording yourselves?
I got a few photographs sent to me during the week. If you'd like to see those, I could bring them up and
that would be fantastic.
Discuss them. Oh, in fact, I think one set may have been sent to Alexis, because that was what they came from Graham, I think, and I'm not sure it came either from Graham or John, but they were going anyway to go on. I'll share and see if I can show you them.
Right, just as a wee question while we're loading up that picture, if you don't mind, but it was just on the foraging reference that we had in that previous question. Somebody had asked, a friend had asked, which species produces the best fruit? So for foragers, is there a particular bramble species that you would recommend? And maybe David, you might have an idea.
You're asking about what's best for eating?
I would say yes, for forage, yeah.
For jam and such like things. I suppose jam and dessert are different, but everybody has their favourites perhaps, but which ones you have? I'm not sure which you have. I'm sure Ulmifolius are quite reasonable if they're producing decent fruit. I know one or two that I like, but I don't think you have many of them. Polyanthemus are quite nice, and Nemeralis are quite acceptable. Of course, the cultivar varieties that exist occasionally in the wild, as it were, that you find are probably good. And the Himalayan giant, which you maybe don't have yet, I don't know, but it's a good one.
And obviously a disclaimer, please do make sure, I know it shouldn't be too difficult to want to ID, but please do make sure if you're eating food that you definitely know what you're eating. Thank you. We do have just a wee question now. Do you have the photos, or will I ask the next question?
I have these photos that I was going to show you, which I can run through them and somebody might recognize this.
Brilliant. So we have a couple of questions in the queue, but I will hold those, so don't worry, we will.
Yes,
get
well,
to
ask me the
those.
questions first.
Oh,
Yes.
great. Okay. So Bernadette just asked, Angus, could you please talk a little bit about the habitat of different brambles, if indeed there are any differences?
Yes, well, there's certainly different brambles do favour different habitats to a degree, but sometimes they're stuck with what they have. They're not very adept at moving around, and sometimes they just have to make the best of it. But yes, there are definitely ones that will tolerate more acidity and ones that will tolerate more lime. And
Do you have an
some that-
example of ones that might tolerate more lime and more acidity?
well, yes, Almifolius and Vestitus are generally considered to favour more lime. Ones that favour more acidity are such as Nemoralis and what else do you have? Do that. What? Yes, I had a picture of one. I'll show you that picture in a minute. It was growing with heather, or bell heather and gorse, which proves that it quite liked acidic ground. And yeah, I'll show you a picture of it presently, and you can see if you can identify it. You might know it better than I do. I'll just show you this picture set here. Let's see. It's too big. But that's an excellent photograph of a stem. You can see all the details you want on that.
So you might just need to click the share button in the bottom center first and the coach.
Oh,
If you want to share with us.
all right. It said I was
can-
sharing. It said I am screen sharing at the top. Am I not?
Maybe I can't see it. I will do.
I can see it.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yes, is somebody seeing it all right now? A
Yes.
stem. Mhm.
Ignore me.
Well, that's an excellent picture of the stem because you can see the hairs not only on the stem but also on the prickles. And that's quite an interesting character because not all that many species have hairs on the prickles. This again, that hairy stem. You can see the effects there of a bit of water having got on there, and it just dampens the hairs down, and it doesn't matter because the other parts are dry, but if it was all like that, you wouldn't be able to see them at all. This flower has been much affected by drops of water landing on the petals, which has produced the effect of it being a rather crumpled flower, but in fact it probably isn't. What I said about it originally, I may have been misled to some degree by the apparent crumpledness of it. You have to be careful of these things. And you see how a picture taken from the front like that, it's very useful to show some features, doesn't let you see whether the stamens are longer or shorter or what. It's very hard to guess whether they're really rising above the styles or not. And you can't really see much of the sepals, you just see a little bit there to suggest there's a point on it. And that's a useful picture of the underside of the leaf, which is something I was always glad to see. It has quite a bit of indumentum, pale, sort of short hairs. It also shows that the stem is quite grooved there, which might be of a useful character. And you can make it a little larger to see the this petiole has some long prickles and some shorter ones. Well, some may have been broken off. The prickles are fairly slender here. Quite a strong base, but much more slender than they looked in the, if I go back to the first picture of the stem. some of these prickles look much stronger. You see that base there, for instance, in that one. You get this kind of variation, and when you have two pictures, you get a better impression of it. If you'd only had the one, you would think maybe they were all strong like this, and if you had the other one, you'd think maybe they were all quite slender prickles. These ones are kind of fairly strong, intermediate. But substantial bases. This other stem at the back is presumably of the same plant, but they are much more curved. Perhaps it's arachis. These are sort of things you might think about when you're looking at a picture. It looks rather as though that leaf is digitated. It doesn't seem to have much of the predate about it, but it's often quite hard to be sure in a photograph. So has anyone got views on what this might be? David? Have you thought David might have an opinion?
So, first of all, you might want to make reference to the books. So the Brambles of the British Isles, and the hairiness of the stem is quite interesting, you see. And the leaflets underneath are quite felted, but the prickles mainly seem to be on the angles.
Yeah.
So when you use, say, the plant crib, you'll only get to what we call a series. So then if you can get access to the Brambles of the British Isles, then that will give you a lot more help, you see. And we often find when we're in the field that looking at the diagnostic features listed by Eders and Newton can be very good indeed. So if I looked at that, I'd think, well, what are there that could fit into that category, you know? But then I'd always want to check, because when we found in Southern Ireland with Alexis, we found that we thought we'd got one called Macrophyllus. And when we did all the detailed checking, we then thought it was another one called Subinamoides. Now, this one, we'd have to think. So it would be a case of checking to see what you are thinking it could be. Do all the characters match? And it doesn't mean when you make a decision that you're right. I like the iNaturalist setup, which calls things a suggestion, which rather than a determination. Now, when you get absolutely confident that you've got something, then it's a determination. But the suggestions can be very good. And the way we're going now with images and the forum type situations, we can form a community of people who are interested and bounce ideas about. And then it's like the Griffinianus, which is one we were seeing, and this is an Irish sea bramble in Southern Ireland just recently, and it's a feature of North Wales and also of Lancashire. I was telling people that it took over 30 years for the great and the good of the bramble world to decide eventually that it was Griffinianus in Lancashire. And of course, if we look at the set of British rubi, which we found at Glasnevin now, there could be a long time gap. You could be talking over 100 years before you get a name that we're happy with. So don't expect immediate results. But I think looking at these images and then thinking, what could it be? What are the possibilities? Does the nominensis have a hairy stem? And to be honest, I can't remember. So I would be thinking, could it be that one? And then I could have a look at the book and say, oh, hairy stem. Well, perhaps it might be that, you see. But it could be another one. So we have to try and deduce. And we might, but we get these suggestions. Anyone, I don't know if anyone remembers a chap, I think he's still going, called Jim Bevin. And he did a multi-access key for I've done one for Rubus, but I don't know what I'm doing really with that, but I've done it for the Field Studies Council. And you get like a probability of what it could be. And those sort of keys can be very good. And the more characters you put in, the nearer the possible identity comes to the top of the list, you know. And that's quite a nice system. So I've got one somewhere on this, and I got so far. I did it with a man called Richard Berkman, and then he moved on. But that could be worth trying if you can find the thing, you know, because it's called a macro in a spreadsheet, and it's basically pulling together the characters that we've put in so far. And it might be, if we've got a forum, that people might say, well, I'm going to enter the characters for this species to the macro, and that sort of thing. So we could get, I think, working together and building our knowledge, not just saying it's probably this and then dismissing it. Is a much better way. You know, a lot of people learning from each other is the way forward. So that's the thing I might be thinking, but I could be completely wrong. So I'd have to keep checking the characters and seeing if they fit. I don't know if Alexis has given a suggestion, or Angus has given a suggestion thus far for these images. I don't know.
Well, I'm a bit reluctant to give a suggestion, really. I did privately to the person that sent it to me, but I have considered it a bit more sense, and you get less confident the more you look at these things sometimes.
Yeah,
which is
I
a
mean,
good thing, of course.
We had a wonderful thing called Septentinalis we think we did, when we were in Dunbar, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And that was good fun, looking at the characters and seeing if they matched, you know. So that's the beauty of it, is to spend several years of dedicated study and learning as you go, you know, and not being afraid to say, oh, I got it wrong. And I now think it's this. You see, because our Dumnoniensis is glabrescent. Well, that stem is more too hairy, you see. So we might rule that one out, and we might think, what else could it be, you know? But if anyone has got a suggestion at this stage, we can work on it a bit more. But it is, you know, a labour of love, or that thing, you know, to try and work out what they are. And sometimes what we collect hasn't got a name. You know, so we can't always be sure, but we can file them away, you know, under Rubus fruticosus or whatever, and do that sort of work. But nobody's coming forward with a suggestion at the moment. But it looks like we'd put it in series ramifolii, but we'd have to look very closely at the stem and see if it does fit suitably into that series, you know.
So may I ask a question then? And Graham posted a question. Any suggestions how to proceed if a bramble doesn't seem to fit the key? So for our recorders, what would you recommend the best way to approach this would be? Is it to follow what Angus, what you were saying about a range of photographs that show a lot of the characteristics and forward them to yourself and David? Is there a group or WhatsApp group or a forum in particular that people can reach out to? What are the supports that are there for our recorders so that we can work on this if it really doesn't seem to fit the key they use in?
Well, my view, for what it's worth, is that if you haven't got too many species in the place, which seems to be the case in Ireland, that the best way to start is to get very familiar with one or two of the commonest ones that you're encountering. And once you really know those thoroughly, you're not so likely to muddle them with anything else, and you'll start to see that, oh, that's different from anything I've seen and got to know before. That one definitely different. So then you start to look at that one and you think, is that the same as the other one that looked different along there? And maybe you think they are, and you can compare them and so on, and start to see that maybe they're the same and maybe they're different, and you can gradually learn maybe a third and a fourth species that way, and just slowly add to your repertoire, but don't go outside your own area for a while, because as soon as you go outside your own area, you will find a whole new galaxy of things that utterly bewilder you for a while. And eventually, you keep looking at them, you'll see some of them are really just your old friends in a different coat, because they look a bit different at first, and then they turn out they're actually the same. But I'm always a bit at sea the first hour if I go anywhere new, even now. And if I go very far, it's probably a whole day before I would see. But yes. Anyway, yes, that was just an illustration. I have another set which I could show you that was sent from. I should say this came, I think, from a place where the almifolius is quite common, and it could therefore be possibly a hybrid. It's something we might just bear in mind in considering it. But anyway,
we could also have a blind spot and be looking at something very common, like Rubus vestitis, you know,
yes,
and not realising what we're looking at.
Perfectly possible, indeed.
John, you have your hand raised. Do you want to jump in with the question or comment there?
Oh, was that me?
Yes, sorry.
Yes,
John.
sorry.
Thank you.
Well, yes. If you forgive me imitating, was it Tony Blair or some other politician? I think I have three very common local brambles, which are almifolius, almifolius, and almifolius. But there is certainly one plant that I'm aware of that resembles almifolius very carefully. The majority of the local ones, only it has white flowers. Is it possible that that is within the range of almifolius, since it's a sexual and slightly variable species?
I have certainly seen it with white flowers, but it may be just that they're, have a propensity to fade. I don't know. It's not a species
Well, I've looked at a range of different ages of flower, and they all seem to be white in that particular cluster. But I'm afraid I don't think I have anything else locally. In fact, if I was to turn my back for a year, the garden would get 6 feet smaller on all 4 sides because of Rubus almifolius. It is that vigorous. It is not my favorite plant.
It's quite remarkable because it's only a few places in the southwest of Scotland where it's a bit frequent along the coasts, and it'll get quite abundant, quite vigorous on the sea cliffs, but you never see it anywhere else really, or hardly ever.
Well, my garden is on carboniferous limestone and is excessively fertile soil because of nitrogen deposition, and the Rubus almus primocanes could grow 12, 13 feet in a year, I think. And I don't appreciate them. They're pretty unpleasant to try and get rid of as well. They come in from the neighbouring property, but I'm fairly sure of that particular identification. But it seems to me that where they occur, there's very little else. And is it true generally that in any one particular area, there's usually a very limited number of different species present?
Not as limited as that. I would say that the average I expect to find if I go to a locality and maybe walk round a monad would be between 4 and 8, and depending on whether it was a good bramble sort of area or a not good bramble area.
Well, I'm assuming, I suppose, that a calcareous area is likely not to be a very good bramble area.
Yes, that may be true. There are very few truly calcareous areas in Scotland, and we were in East Lothian, as David was saying a week or two ago, and that is as near as we get to a calcareous area, and there were 2 principal brambles there, Radula and Latifolius. But there were several others, we weren't restricted to 2 species by any means. I think we saw, I don't know, 8 or 9 probably in the time we were there around about the area.
it sounds like we have a bit of a challenge up for our Northern Irish recorders to do some recording on calcareous grounds and see how many we can find here.
Is there a large proportion of this alkaline territory in Northern Ireland, particularly in the
there's
north, or
much-
generally in Ireland?
There's a lot of basalt, which is certainly base rich, but not particularly calcareous.
Yes, we have basalt quite extensively, but what usually happens with us on account of the fairly high rainfall, I suppose, is that the surface layer becomes quite acidic, although the rock underneath is quite basic. And this can be quite good, really, because you can get both kinds of things depending on how deep the roots go. So
I don't want to give a false impression. I've only been looking very locally for brambles, and if I was to go 5 miles, there's areas of peatland and so on that would be of greater interest, probably.
Yes, it'd be quite different. Well, we can learn more about it as we go on. We'll just have to see, because we just don't know at the moment so much about a lot of the areas.
We have a couple of questions from Declan. Declan, if you're available, would you like to jump on and ask your questions?
Can you hear me?
We can. That's great.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Thank you very much for what you've done so far to keep us going. And the book, of course, is terrific. Where I was particularly interested in the accounts that you had of the suberecti. But I'd love 2 questions just used for fun. One of my favorite plants is Rubus hebridensis. And the question I had in my mind was, given the scarcity of Rubus caesius in the north of Britain and also in the north of Ireland, how could hebridensis have managed to become so successful if it is truly a hybrid derivative of the caesius group? And the supplementary question would be, whether you see the decline of the section suberecti as potential harbingers of climate change as well as of habitat destruction. You mentioned the habitat destruction and the erosion of peatland and so on. That's fine, we've got that. But I'm wondering whether or not they also have this potential to indicate climate change itself. So 2 things, Rubus hebridensis question, origins, and the second thing, whether the suberecti are harbingers of climate change.
Okay, thank you. I'll take the second one first. I think so far there has been no significant influence in Scotland on the Rubus section from climate change. If anything, we're getting more rain, and that's what they like best. And I wouldn't think they would have much objection to a little warmth now and again if we were to get that. No, I think they're very tolerant of climate variation. I think what they definitely don't like is being done in.
Yep.
No bramble likes that very much, but they're less capable than most, I think, of initiating new colonies. They can spread vegetatively very successfully, and given the chance, they can cover a large area. But if the colony is eliminated, it may be a very long time before a new one might establish. I don't have any firm evidence for this, and it's very hard to acquire it, but you get the impression that way. And maybe it's just partly being overlooked. I do keep finding fresh unknown sites of it, so maybe the situation isn't as bad as it appears.
Yeah, no, what I've picked up on is that as the raised bogs in the central plain of Ireland are drying out, that we have this new birchwood community forming, within which you're getting plicatus, nescensis, and possibly even physis, which would be nice, beginning to appear in the bracken that is spreading onto the margins of the raised bogs.
Yes, indeed. I think it could work in their favour, really. But it's very hard to speculate on these things because there's really inadequate evidence. This is a problem. I mean, I can tell you that the proportion of records has gone down to about 30% of what it was a century ago. But this may just mean that we're not recording as assiduously to some degree.
Mhm.
Probably true, because people aren't capable of recognizing these kind of plants as well as they were at that time, because they used to cut samples and give them to experts to name them, and that was how the record was made. Whereas now they walk past the thing and don't record it at all because they have noticed it.
That's a very good point, Angus, and it's something I think we would like to work on over the coming months and years with yourselves and the recorders. What kind of activities can we do short of going out and taking lots of pictures and sending them to yourselves? How useful is it for us to kind of do training with dried samples and so on, so that we can get an understanding of the different characteristics before we go out in the field and into the middle of a bramble wood?
Well, I've tried in the book, to give you the outlines of what you should do. Yes, the characters you need to look at, and there's a key that would work moderately well, I think. I could improve it for Irish situations, perhaps, with a bit of care. And it'll never be infallible by any means, but it should point you in the general direction. It operates on, rather than using series, it operates on the principle of certain characters. If you can first of all recognize the ones that we've just been talking about with Declan, the erect kinds of brambles that grow in the form of raspberries, then that's the first thing to consider. If you can rule those out, then that's 4 less you have to think about. And the second thing I get you to look at are for hairy anthers, because if you can find them, you've greatly reduced the number of species you have to think about. But if you fail to find them either, then your next thing is to consider whether you might be looking at a corylifolian type. And that's fairly easy to recognize because of the character of the leaves and 1 or 2 other things which are explained. So it's not hard to get used to picking out a corylifolian. And if all that fails and it's none of those things, then you're into the main body of the work, really. And yeah, probably best to look at glands after that and see if there are glands on the stem or primocane, if you can get it. And if not there, then are there any on the inflorescence? And if there aren't any in either place, then you've got a threefold division, and you can take it from there. And after that, you can look at some of the things that David was talking about, like the prickles being on the angles or not, and things that define the actual series that we classify them in. And hopefully from there, you're in a better position. Once you're reduced to one of the chapters, one of the series in Edison Newton's book, then you have a key in that which you can use for that series, and that's moderately helpful if you have the right characters. And you have pictures in my book to compare and see if they look plausible or not. In the end, you've got to decide for yourself and just say it might be this or it might be that, and sometimes leave it at that and come back to another one and see, oh, that's quite like it. Maybe that's the same too. And eventually you start to fall into place, but it doesn't happen quickly. And you have to accept the fact that for a while you won't be able to identify most of the bushes that you see or look at perfectly, but you can say it, that there are not this and not that and not the next thing. And that's a big step forward. I haven't answered Declan's other question about hebridensis, possibly because I can't. But it's a whole corylifolian group is a difficult one, which is not properly resolved, and there are a number of what we call species in it that are probably composites or aggregates of some sort. And whether all of them have arisen from primary hybridization with caesius is, I think, very doubtful.
That's what I suspect.
At some point in their ancestry, they probably had that, but ancestry goes back a long way, and it could well be many, many generations ago, that other things have happened in the interim. Hybridensis, as defined by the type, which comes from Gourock in the Upper Clyde Firth, and it's described in the book from that type, occurs in a quite well-defined zone just around the Upper Firth of Clyde. And it is a plant of the low altitudes and rich soil near to the water, well, within a mile or two usually of the water, because you start to go up the hill otherwise. I don't think it's that it likes water, it's just that it likes the richer soils. But that is quite different in some ways from the hybridensis that we still call that further down and in the more open areas, open coasts and so on, which also grows high up the hills, and of which David Welsh found specimens in the hills of Banffshire, up in effectively the outliers of the Cairngorms, which Alan Newton went and looked at and identified as hybridensis, but told him that it won't survive the next hard winter. It's still there 40 years later. It's doing quite well. So it's a funny plant, but at the moment we're calling them all hybridensis because there's nothing better to call them, and that's fair enough, but at some point they may have to be reassessed.
It could be interesting to find out, because I don't think we know yet, the chromosome count for hybridensis. I have had quite a lot done for brambles in England before Brexit happened, and then the arrival of material went to pot, and I sent them to a guy in the Czech Republic, and that would be good to know. I think some of these they can be pentaploids, and I've got one in the field here which is very vigorous, and that's a hexaploid. You see, it's got an extra set of chromosomes. Tuberculators should be 35, but for the super tuberculators, which is 42 in the field. So it would be interesting to know. And I think some of these were coastal species like Latifolius, and perhaps hybridensis is quite coastal, because that's where they've been able to survive. And I find some, the Michael Caine corallifolium after a film, which was filmed in County Durham. And that's a coastal one, which I thought was polyanthamous to begin with, but I realised it was a corallifolium, and it seems to be confined to this strip of County Durham. And see, these things can come into being in coastal situations, but I think the way we manage the land now, they can actually go inland along the road and railway networks from where they might have originated from, which could have been the the fringes of the Irish Sea for some of them. So Latifolius, thus far we know it goes as far south as Southport in Lancashire. That it's a very characteristic Scottish and probably Northern Ireland bramble, by the coast. But if they get a chance, they'll get into quarries inland and things like that. But they're predominantly coastal, I find, some of them.
Well, the distribution of Latifolius in Scotland is curious, really, because the true Latifolius of the type is along the eastern coast, such as we saw in Dunbar. But a similar form occurs in the Clyde Valley inland through Lanarkshire and down towards the coast, but extending right into the middle of the country in a fairly well-defined band. And then down the Ayrshire coast, it occurs again quite commonly, but looks different because it starts to look more like pruinosis, or one of those round-stemmed, pale kind of plants with weak prickles and prickles all round the stem and so forth. But it doesn't come out as pruinosis either, because the other characters don't match. So it's a funny plant, and I don't know what sort you have in Ireland. It would be worth having. If any of you who have latifolius would send me some photographs of the Irish latifolius. It would be very interesting to see what you've got there.
I think I have had it in Monaghan Town, which is in the North Midlands of Ireland, presumably birds sown there, you know, on the side of a petrol station. So, yeah, David's right that it is spreading. But yeah, I think it's mostly northeast of Ireland, northeastern counties. So, but I didn't get photographs of that. I have a specimen that would have been determined by David Allen a good few years ago. So that is the only specimen I have from my vice county. But
okay. Now, there's another question I would like to ask of the Irish panelists generally, or anyone else who happens to know, which is historically through the Flandrian and so forth, what was the situation in the south of Ireland? Do you think it's plausible that any brambles survived there throughout the last glaciation? Or is this totally improbable?
Are you harking back to Watson's ideas?
I'm not having any ideas. I'm just wondering what was the historical situation?
The last the so-called Eastern General glaciation went down about 2/3 to 3/4, rather like the situation that you have in Britain.
The actual ice cap went down that far.
Yes, but there was one previous to that, and they've discovered moraines off the south coast of Ireland, submerged.
Yes,
so that's to be chewed on as well, which is another thought, which might be a little bit analogous to the Doggerland and so on. But basically, the Midlands is very lime rich, so therefore we have a lot of caesious derivatives, quite a lot. And if you want to find any of the acid ground ones, you really just do have to go up the mountains, of which we got plenty, but most of the mountains are around the coast. But we've got quite a lot of species, and we've very imminently now David Allen's summary of the vice county distribution of brambles in Ireland will be printed and available. So that will be, and that is supported by an awful lot of voucher material as well, either in possession of the individual bramble recorders based out of Dublin Naturals Field Club, Dublin Group, or established in the Glasnevin Herbarium, or quite a lot have been placed in the British Museum. The things that David Allen couldn't decide on, he has a sort of a cupboard at the end, somewhere in the BM, and he put all the Irish material in there, and possibly other stuff as well, with his transitory thoughts on things. So there'll be a rich vein for somebody who's London-based to go in and have a look at that stuff at some stage.
Fantastic. Everybody, I'm conscious of time. We just have a few minutes left this evening. So I just want to, if that's okay, move on to a couple of the questions that we have left to talk about before we finish up. Apologies for cutting it short, because I'm sure everybody could talk on this or listen to the conversation all evening. One of the questions out from Bernadette is, has anyone ever used DNA analysis for Rubus ID? Go ahead, David. You have yourself.
Yes, I've not done anything myself. I've been the collector, you see. And a few of us have been the collectors. So another one is my great friend Rob Randu, who sadly passed away. And we had to go with the series Glandulosi. Now I think I was out with County Tipperary with the recorder on Saturday, and absolutely fantastic one there, the Glandulosi. And I'm pretty sure he would want some, material sent to him if I can get round him for DNA studies, because this false praetextus, I think we called it in the end, was absolutely marvellous. And then Devlin showed me some fantastic thing very briefly the other day as well, which was possibly confined but locally abundant in a wood. And these molecular studies have proved quite interesting. The majority, about 250 samples, have been just the chromosome counts, basically. It's called flow cytometry. But there has been some included in the molecular studies, particularly the Glandulosi, And we found that some of the things we were naming, we'd named them wrong, and they were genetically identical to one in the Netherlands. You see, one of mine in Lancashire. So that was a surprise. So it's well worth doing. And one of them, the ancient origins of the species was from Southwest Europe. And for the other one, which was similar but with a hairy stem, the origins were from Southeast Europe. So it's very important to do these. And but if we can get round them, we can't get round people in Edinburgh, sadly, but you never know. If we keep knocking at the door, one might get somewhere. So if any university people who've got money to do these things, or could just do it as, oh, well, I can add this on, you know, for something to do after my evening meal, which is the sort of thing that's happened. That's fantastic, because I mean, we can find more and more. And with the suberecti, the ancient ancestor is assumed extinct. And it's plausible that a lot of the suberecti have, you know, originate from this assumed ancient ancestor. So, and the caesius, that should be, you see markers with the DNA, which indicate that they are descended from, or there's been multiple hybridizations over thousands of years, probably, to produce the diverse flora we've got now. But as more and more techniques become available, and it's very exciting, you know. So that's one to, you know, keep making progress with. We've already made progress, and hopefully we'll make more and more. So it's been great fun. It's been hard work, but we've done quite a lot. And even if our beloved friends have passed away, because of the specimens and the techniques now, we can analyze more and more the dried material, which at first we needed fresh material, but the techniques have been refined and refined and refined, and we can use, if you've got specimens that less than 5, you know, perhaps 5-year-old, 10-year-old, the probability of analyzing it and getting good results is better. But we can have a go, you see, and it's absolutely fascinating. But unfortunately, they talk in a language that we can't understand in this complicated scientific, impress the academics language. But you know, we in the summary, we can probably find some very interesting for the not, you know, people like us who were novices in the world of genetics and that. Fascinating results, so it's good. But unfortunately, the you know, loss of connectivity with Europe for the English people and the Welsh and the Scottish probably is a bit of a disadvantage. But we might be able to get around it, you know.
Thank you. A question from Christopher. There is a good online website by John Norton which covers Southern English brambles. Any plans to do something like this for Irish or Northern Irish or Scottish plants? Add up to anybody who might know.
No, so what was the question again?
Sorry.
Something's happened in Southern England.
Somebody, John Norton has a
John
good
Norton,
online
yes.
website covering Southern England brambles. Are there any plans to do something like this for the Scottish or Irish plants?
Angus has already done it with his handbook. That's superb. It's absolutely fantastic. And then we could do it for Northern Ireland, as Angus has mentioned. We could do a subset that relates particularly to the species that occur there. Southern Ireland would be very difficult because there's 185 named species in all of Ireland, if we could say that. So, well, we have said it. So the broad vision of the island of Ireland, we would say 185, which is quite a lot. So that would be difficult to do, but we could have a go. So when I've got British Wildflowers, there's on that, which my friend John Somerville did, there is a subsection on there which covers brambles. It's mainly Lancashire brambles, as one would expect, but there's quite a few images on there. Take no notice of the text boxes because they've all gone to pot because the arrangement, when we did it a long time ago, the way it's arranged on the you know, on the website as it went funny. But the images are there. So you click on the species and you can see Nemorales, Nemorosus, whatever you want. Probably Latifolius is there. And we could amplify
Yes,
that,
I'm
or we
trying
could
this now.
work closely with John Norton and make it an absolute super deluxe one,
Great.
because he thought, you know, would be good.
If anybody has any good online resources, please do pop them in the chat there. I have a link in the chat for the BSBI website page with information about Angus's handbook as well. So I know we're kind of coming to time now. So if there are any questions that we haven't answered, apologies. We will get a copy of the questions afterwards and make sure that we have our answers for those. And we will try and get all of those answers for you for when we send out the link to the YouTube recording. So if everybody is okay with that, I think, folks, it's time to wrap up now. Thank you so much to Angus and to David as well, and for everyone else who took the time to give their questions and to discuss their opinions as well. So thank you, we really appreciate it. We are hoping that this evening kickstarts an interest in Bramble recording throughout Northern Ireland and beyond. I know a lot of you are joining us from other areas as well. And we'll look forward to following up with some in-person events over the coming months and years. Angus, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to say in closing this evening.
That me you're asking?
Yes, sorry, Angus.
Yeah, right.
Just thank you for your time. And
yeah. No, I'm just very pleased to have had the chance to speak to some of you and hear what you say, and I hope we'll get together again. And I would very much like to get to Ireland sometime and have a look at it, because I feel very bad. I've never been there. I don't want to be like Watson, who never set foot in Scotland in his life.
for sure. So we will follow up, and if we are arranging a field event or a date either of you could attend, we would absolutely really appreciate that. So thank you again. Just before I go, I'd also again like to thank our funders there for making the talk and the entire Botanical Skills project possible. And so with that, thank you all so much for attending.